Okay, so welcome everybody to this event here tonight. My name is Stephen Dowling. I'm one of the leadership team here in VVSSH Pacific. Welcome everybody, and especially there's a lot of new members, which is fantastic to see. So just a tiny bit about our community here. The purpose of the BVSSH community, Sooner, Safer, Happier, is all about trying to provide inspiration for people who want to achieve better value, sooner, safer, happier outcomes in their organization, and also foster a more humane way of work. We want to introduce the community to people who we believe are doing some amazing stuff across the world, one of which is Leslie here. So, and the whole idea is to inspire people and motivate people and hopefully share some great stories to inspire people to achieve these outcomes. So just a couple of logistics things. So like I said, cameras on. We really appreciate if people would put their cameras on. I know as a presenter myself, it's just, and for Leslie, getting that energy of people, it makes a really big difference. If there's any questions, I know Leslie's going to talk for probably about 25, 30 minutes. We're going to leave plenty of time for questions. So if there's questions you have, please put them in the chat function. And then we're going to keep a monitor. Myself and Maria will keep a track of them. And then when it comes to questions, we'll maybe pick people to get them to ask those questions themselves. So rather than just calling on the chat, we'll get people to do it. So moving on to our event tonight. So I'm really excited about this event, Pretotyping, Scaling Innovation Through Rapid Experimentation. We're super lucky to have Leslie Barry with us. About 3 years ago, I remember I was running an event here in Melbourne with Barry O'Reilly, and we were asking him to say, who would be some VIP guest you'd love to invite? And he said, oh, Leslie would be a really important one. And Steve, you've got to get to know this guy. And I was so glad that I did many years ago. So Leslie is the founder and CEO of Exponentially. He works with leading Australian and international companies to help them to get better at experimentation and rapidly test ideas. To do this, he used a Google-developed method for rapid experimentation called Pretotyping, and he's a world-renowned expert in this. In the past, Leslie has headed innovation for ThoughtWorks and Sportsbet, built for startups, sold to, and also I think he freely admits he's blown up a couple as well. So Leslie, he's also a guest lecturer on experimentation and pretotyping in Stanford University. A huge welcome, Leslie. So excited to have you here together with us, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come and share with the community. I think we're going to start with doing a little bit of a poll, Leslie. So I'll just, and I think this will set a bit of context. So let me just share this with people. So we've got a couple of questions which we would love to ask people. So, there's only 4 questions here. So do you currently run experiments? Single choice. Yes, sometimes, not at all. Experimentation is built into the DNA of your organization. Yes or no? Does your organization truly believe that failure is critical to learning? 3 choices. So yes, yes, but not truly lived and believed, or no. And then the last one is, does your organization currently use defined experimentation methods? Yes or no? Okay, I'll give people a time just to answer. Okay, so let me end the poll. Let me share the results. Okay, so here we are, Leslie. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we currently run experiments? Is experimentation built into the DNA of your organization? No. I like that one. Yeah. Yes, but not truly lived and believed. No. Does your organization currently use defined experimentations?
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, over to me, Stephen.
Over to you, Leslie. Thanks.
Okay, so I've just shared my screen. I just want to make sure you can all see it. Is that great? Sound is good. Excellent. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for that awesome introduction. I'm sure I can live up to it, I hope. And thanks everybody else for making the time this afternoon to spend some time with us. So I'll be taking you through rapid experimentation and how we use prototyping as the tool set for this. You'll also get a copy of these slides, so you don't have to scribble furiously. You're welcome to, if you like, of course. And I'm really looking forward to your questions at the end. Okay, so let's get into it. So Leslie Barry, as Stephen says, I've built 4 startup companies. I've sold 2 and I've completely destroyed the other 2. So massive, massive failures. They're still carrying the wounds of those. I also work with a lot of accelerators around the world. So I've worked with hundreds of startup founders and lots of failure there too. So I pride myself on being the biggest failure you're ever going to meet. I'm really experienced at failure, and hopefully I've learned something out of this, and we can put that to some good use. More interestingly, I hope, is I've worked and run innovation teams at Sportsbet. I've also run innovation teams at ThoughtWorks Consulting. So Agile and Lean is very close to my heart. And over the last 4 years, I've worked with all of these companies. And this isn't the usual brag logo wall kind of thing. The reason I'm showing you this is we've run experiments in highly regulated industries like banking and financial services, through to News Corp, Procter & Gamble, universities like Australian National University. And what we've seen is this process works really well at scale in the enterprise. The reason I show you that is it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is, or the ideas are, or your team is that you're working with. We're all trying to answer this question. So the question is, how do we test ideas fast and discover products and services that our customers love? And when I say products here, I'm talking products and services interchangeably, business to business, business to consumer, for all of those things. And I got challenged when I said we need to discover products that customers love, because they said, yeah, that's great, but how do we make money? Well, if your customers don't love the solution, then they're not going to use it. If they don't use it, they're not going to pay for it. If they don't pay for it, they're not going to give you money or give you what you need inside your organization. So it's really important that in this early stage that we're in the discovery mode and we're finding things that customers love. So how do we do this? So typically in organizations, so no offense to McKinsey, but this is about $100 million worth of McKinsey slides without the other 900 slides. This is a version of everybody's innovation process. So you'll go through a version of this where we go idea discovery, and we're really good at this generally speaking. So we'll do technology scans, we'll listen to our call centers, we'll have hack days, we'll listen to our people, we'll brainstorm, we'll do all these wonderful things to get ideas. Then we go to a short list of ideas. We take those, we then build out a proof of concept or minimum viable product. We incubate it, we scale it as we should, and ta-da, got $1 billion business, or we solved the problem. Except it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because although we're good at idea discovery, what validation often means, we skip the validation phase. Validation either means asking 10 people if they like the product or service, and then going on their opinion, which we'll talk about a lot, or it means, frankly, guessing. So what we do, and this might be familiar to you, we get a short list of ideas. How do we shortlist them? We take our best guess inside the organization. We're the worst possible judge of whether it's a good idea or not, because we're not the customer. And then we constrain in the back of our minds around, are the resources available? What could budget look like? Is the team free? What about the product backlog? And all these things. And we filter it through that internally before we do validation with data. And then often we build a proof of concept. That proof of concept becomes the end product, and we scale that, and we end up with a bunch of zombie projects that fail across the organization. Now, I'm sure this doesn't happen in your company because all the projects are wonderful, but hypothetically speaking, let's say that happens, okay? So validation is the issue. So how does this happen? Well, it doesn't happen because we're incompetent. It happens because we're doing exactly what we are designed to do in our organizations. Our job is to protect the organization, grow profits, scale up everything, make it robust, have the call center involved in security and risk and governance, all these wonderful things. But a great filter for experimentation is if you have a bunch of solutions, potential solutions to a problem for a customer, how do you know which one to pursue? And that's why we do experimentation. So what this is about is not about building and executing, which you're great at. It's about discovery. And building and executing is a very poor way to test new ideas. So a filter here is, don't use experimentation if you're building a bridge. We know how to build bridges, go and build a bridge, okay? But if you're unsure about the solution, solving the customer problem, then we run experiments. So we reframe this to go, how do we discover solutions that solve customer problems 10 times better? And the reason we've chosen this is, and I've used the 10x there, the buzzwordy nonsense, sorry about that, but it's important. There's two kinds of 10x. So if you're filtering out whether you should even tackle something and prioritize an idea for testing, it must do one of two things really well. Either you must reduce friction out of your environment by 10 times. So take steps away, remove steps, wake up every day and go, how do we have less process? How do we take features out of our product and service? Horrible news flash for you is no customers care about your business at all. They care about how you solve a problem for them. And that's why they give you money or choose to work with you. It's as simple as that. We love our companies, we love our brands and all these things, and they're great. And I'm sure they're wonderful environments. Customers don't care. They're going, are you taking steps away? Are you making things easy for me? That's the one reason people work with you. The next reason is, it's much, much harder, is you make a product so compelling that you have to use it. You can't not use it, like an iPad, for example, which is the example everybody challenges me on always. Something like that. Much harder to do, but that's the other side of 10x thinking. So if you don't believe this is true, don't do it now because I'll lose you. But next time you go to your mobile phone, whatever's on your home screen does one of these two things. So this is an important filter for, is this worth working on? But this all starts with ideas. And what do we know about ideas? They're junk. Most of ideas are rubbish. So this is not from Leslie Barry Co. This is from Astro Teller, that's a real person. His job title is the captain of moonshots, and he runs Google's X R&D innovation labs. And he said at a Singularity University conference in 2019 that they see tens of thousands of ideas, and 99% of the ideas they see fail. Okay, so failure for them is the default outcome of all early stage ideation and experimentation. So what I'm not saying here is the startup message of, fail or die, and failure is great, and failure is not great. Failure feels horrible. It's a terrible thing. We don't want to do it, but it's inevitable in early stage innovation. So because it's inevitable, we have to reframe it. So when I say failure like this, it's important. The theme of this is sooner, safer, happier. It's important that people feel safe around failure. And we reframe failure into time to data. So the way we talk about failure is, given that's inevitable in the early stage, and it's okay that we fail, that's fine. We're not expecting 100% pass rate in experimentation. Then how do we reduce time to data? How do we reduce our time to learning? And this is what we're trying to do through experiments. The reason we run experiments is, what's the shortest, cheapest, most cost-effective way to learn whether somebody wants something or not, and fail quickly so we can learn, and let customers guide us around what we're doing. So really important to understand the context around failure. So if this is all true, we went to go and learn, what do we do about this? So we went to go and learn from these exponential innovators. And I assume most of you on the call aren't a multi-trillion-dollar globally dispersed company that has unlimited funding. But if we can learn from them with their complexity and their geographical spread and their products and all these kinds of things, we can learn a few things. So the first thing we learned was these companies are really good at building the right it. Now, it being product, business model, service, really good at this. These are all very successful multi-billion-dollar products. How then do the same companies with the same resources and the same people build this junk on the right-hand side? So all of this is stuff you probably haven't heard of for a good reason, because it failed, okay, where they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to bring these products to market. So how on earth does this happen? Well, the way it happens, it doesn't matter how well we execute ideas. If there's no market interest, they're going to fail. And that sounds super obvious. So there's two important things here. One is, let's find out first, without spending a few $100 million, if anybody cares. That's probably pretty important. The second thing is, if you think about your projects or products and when you're launching them and they start going off the rails, what happens? We start executing. We hire more people. We fire people. We add more project managers or project management. We add more process. We throw more marketing dollars at it. All of that is wasted because the fundamental problem is nobody cared. So competent execution doesn't fix this problem. Next thing we learned was we save $1 million every time we don't build something. So that sounds like completely made up nonsense, and it is. I made it up, but I made it up to keep my job. So in 2016, I just joined an organization. I told the whole story about failure and all this jazz, and the CEO said, that's great. Then asked the horrible question, which is impossible to answer. What's your return on innovation investment going to be? You can't answer that. So I said, somewhere between $1 and $1 trillion. I have no idea. Not a good way to keep your job. So back to the drawing board. So what we went away and we figured out, how do we measure this? So the way we measure this, and this is really, we've used this extensively, it's really powerful, is think about every product or project that is about to get invested in and how much would it cost to execute that idea. Then what we do is we run experiments on it. And if they fail, we bank the savings. And we've saved customers $25 million over the last 4 years that we've been able to track through doing this, where there was momentum, everyone thought we should do it, they loved it, and we ran experiments so we couldn't give people free money to use the thing, and we bank it. What does it do? It saves real money, real time, real resources, real sprints, real energy, and all the scope creep and everything that goes with it. So it's a really powerful number, this. So if that's true, then how do we solve this? Very easy, run more ideas. So we go to, most companies we work with are testing between 4 and 8 ideas a year. Big organizations are running experiments. So yeah, if you're running 4, think about your own business or your own operation. If you're running 4, test 40. If you're running 100, test 1,000. Not so easy. Everything changes. How do you run experiments? How do you track experiments? How do you measure results? How do you cross-collaborate? How do you fund experiments? How do you do this at scale? And when I say experiment, and test this to the way you do it at the moment, an experiment is we put a solution in front of a customer where the customer believes it to be true, and we measure what they do versus what they say. That's what an experiment is. And I'll expand on that in a moment. So the way we do this is we figured out that there's 3 things where customers or companies can improve around running experimentation. If you look at this, if we start on the left-hand side, where we find customers or companies are really bad, we're really bad at prioritization. So whatever ideas you put into your pipeline are going to get experimented on, tested on, and proof of concept and all that. We have to fix that problem. So ideas come in through product management, innovation teams, strategy teams, all sorts of different ways. And we find if you haven't got a robust prioritization process that filters out high priority, strategically aligned ideas without killing all the potential good ideas, we end up with a problem. And we end up working on nonsense. So we end up working on small incremental improvements or incremental changes. And of course, you can experiment on those too, but we don't get those big, juicy projects or ideas that we can actually test. The next thing is we have to get really good at experimentation. What does that mean? It means when we run experiments, people don't get terrified. They don't think we're going to blow up the organization. They don't think we're doing random things. It's a structured process. We believe the results and we do something with the results. And then recommendation often is broken, which is companies I've been working with for a year or two. The first year they only have one KPI or OKR, which is to go from 0 to 100 experiments in a year, because that proves that they can do this. And everyone gets wrapped up and loves doing experiments. But then we don't do anything with the result. We ignore the result. We don't use validation as a technique to make a decision out of all possible ideas we could work on, which ones do we invest in. So these are the 3 key things that we see happen. In terms of results, we've seen that it really delivers results. So what we're trying to do over time is it's very easy to run a random experiment here and there. It's extremely difficult in the enterprise to get a process and people and technology and tools and all the change in place to do this at scale. When you get this right, all the good things happen. You get this culture of experimentation, which means people are feeling more empowered. They're able to have rational conversations on what we should and shouldn't invest in. We get growth because if you're running that many experiments, you are going to find 1 or 2 really good ideas, or you get the cost savings by in the beginning, killing all the ideas that you shouldn't be working on in the first place. 2 quick examples before I drop into prototyping is If you're not from Australia, RACV is a big motor insurance company, and AGL Energy is a utility company. And we worked with them a few years ago, and RAC, for example, really increased the rate of experimentation. But I love the quotes from the customer, which was, customers don't do what they say. So we've seen this, customers are liars. All customers lie to you all the time. They tell you what you want to hear. So it's important to get data. And our facts don't care about your opinion. So the numbers are the numbers. With AGL, what they've done really well is they've ramped up to thousands of tests, literally, and saving a ton of money by not investing in all these silly things. Okay, so let's focus in on running experiments at scale. So when we start working with people, we don't start with prioritization and recommendation, because there are endless tomes written on innovation processes and methods and all this jazz, and that's fine. But what we're trying to do, and I think this group will align with this, is really think about, how do you evidence that this works? When I say experiments or innovation, we are so tired of this and so bored of this, and so in some cases scared of it, that we need to evidence that it works and it's structured and it's good, and we're not going to break anything, and nobody's going to die if we run an experiment. Okay, and what do we even mean by this thing? So we start with experimentation, we create short, sharp experiments, and we prove that it works. And we use the experiment process to figure out how to sort of get the blockers in the organization across the line and demonstrate that it works. And over time, we then go upstream and downstream around doing this at scale. So let's zoom into prototyping. We found prototyping as the best way to run experiments because it gives us really quick data. So what is this prototyping word that Leslie's made up? Well, it hasn't. It's not my fault. Alberto Savoya is an interesting guy. So he led the team at Google that created the prototyping method. And he was the first engineering director at Google on the AdWords project back in the day. They put a team together in around 2007, 2008 to sort of develop this methodology around prototyping to test and validate ideas at scale. He's gone off to write a book about it. And he's also been teaching at Stanford University. I've been working really closely with Alberto since around 2016. And if you ask him what we do really well, it's about industrializing the process and the approach. So how do you do experiments in a rigorous, repeatable way where it's believable and doesn't create a huge load on the organization? So that's the connection. This is how we do prototyping. So what is prototyping? What prototyping is we're trying to go and test ideas as fast as we can, as quickly as we can, to get time to data. So what you're trying to typically do is get an experiment out the door in 2 weeks or under 2 weeks for a few $100s. Now, that's not made up. We've done just over 1,000 prototypes over the 4 years with our organization. And in 95% of the cases, we can get an experiment up and running within 2 weeks for a few $100 or a few $1,000s, depending on the scale of the organization. The hardest part of my job is to get people to spend so little and do it so quickly. It's much easier to go to a client and go, give me $20,000 for proof of concept, $50,000. Very easy, relatively easy, okay? But to go, give me only $500 to run an experiment, nobody believes you. It's extremely hard to do, but it's absolutely doable. And we can talk in the Q&A around examples and all these things if you're interested in that. So what prototyping is trying to do is to make sure we're building the right it before we build it right. Get my head out the way there. And it, in this case, as I said, is business model or business or product or service. And we want to make sure we build it right. So the obvious question probably in everybody's minds is, what's the difference between a prototype and a prototype? And a prototype is asking the question, can we build this? Can we make this thing? And the answer is, it's 2022, yes, we can make everything. You might not have the resources in your organization to do it, but we can absolutely make everything, barring quantum mechanics and all these various things, but it's doable. The better question to ask at the moment in our organizations is, should I build this? Should I make this in the first place? The way we do that is we frame it with a question to go, how do I test market demand for $0 in 24 hours? Now, can you do that? No. But what you're trying to do is get your brain to a place where if it currently takes you a month to test something, can you do it in 2 weeks? If it's 2 weeks, can we do it in a week? If it costs you $20,000, can you do it for $10,000? The way we do that is to get data versus opinion. So we want to measure what customers do, not what they say. So opinion is 1,000 Facebook likes or 1 million YouTube views. Data is people taking action and subscribing or giving you an email address or a meeting or some time or some money or some action. Another important bit about prototyping is what we do is we run short, sharp experiments of small groups of people initially of around 100. So we're not looking for statistical significance. We're looking for, in the best case scenario, with 100 people, how fast can we learn? And I'm sure you'll challenge me on this in the Q&A, and that's fine. That's what we're aiming for. Because we want to get what we call skin in the game as fast as possible. So getting people to do things. So I just want to pause here for anyone who's in market research. I'm not saying market research is junk or that qualitative research is not valid. What we're saying is that it's a really good source of ideas, and it's a good way to validate downstream how people want to engage with your product or service. But we find the fastest way is simulate the end result. It doesn't exist. Don't build any technology. Put an offer in front of a customer and measure what they do. The reason we want the skin in the game is this concept of OPD versus Yoda in prototyping. So we all suffer from this. So this is other people's data versus your own data. So what we see very often is people think data and validation means a subsidiary of ours in the UK did this thing, therefore we should do it in Australia. Or a startup did this in the US, we should do it in Australia. Or someone in another part of the company did this well, therefore we should do it here. That's a great source of ideas. It's a very bad way to validate. Because what we're trying to do is we want to get your own data. So for this particular unique use case, for this particular solution, at this particular time in the world, for this particular set of customers, we run an experiment to see, are we solving the problem for them in all of that context? Is that true? Of course. The last 2 years with COVID, all our market research is wrong, is different. People are behaving completely differently. QR codes were never a thing in Australia until 2 years ago, and suddenly they're a thing, all these kinds of things. So it's really important that we focus on getting Yoda, and the way we do it is quick, short, sharp experiments. The way we run experiments is we've got these 9 experimentation methods that we teach people. You'll recognize some of these, I'm sure. And the reason we do that is if we don't teach you how to run experiments, what do? If I said to you, run an experiment, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to spin up MailChimp or SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or whatever you use, and you're going to run a survey. And what do we get back from surveys? Opinions. We don't care about opinions. We want hard numbers. So we teach people how to do this. And then the last bit on prototyping before I give you an example is the fact that all this is a hypothesis-driven testing method. So I won't go through this in detail, of course, but we go from ideas, we filter that through a lean canvas. Why? Because it gives us a customer view. We then formulate a hypothesis around what we believe to be true, what behavior we believe the customer will take. We then do a thing called an XYZ hypothesis, which is what percent of what people will take what action. In my mind, this is the key to how prototyping is different, because upfront we figure out with the business and with your customer or with your team what good looks like. So we'll say 10% of people who wake up grumpy in the morning want a coffee before 9 a.m. for $5 or that kind of thing. And the reason it works so well is because we agree upfront what good looks like. Therefore, we know if the experiment passed or failed. And we don't have this endless debate downstream about whether it was a good or bad idea, because we're not going for the fallacy of high or low numbers. So for example, often we find companies will go, I'll pick a silly example, let's launch an app. We've got 10,000 downloads. Woohoo, high five. Why is that good? Maybe it should be 1 million in your context. Maybe it should be 10. So let's figure out what that looks like before we start. We then create a hyperzoom, which means we just drill into what's the easiest experiment we can run tomorrow morning for the cheapest amount of money to get our time to data. And we run the experiment, and generally the first one fails. That's good. We run 4 to 6 experiments out of experience. There isn't a magic number. And then we get data. And the data says very simply, people use this or they don't use it. And that becomes a recommendation of what we should proceed with as the next idea. So let's make that a little bit more real. So a quick example of this is I chose the Mechanical Turk because it is something we can probably all relate to. So in most organizations, the way we test things is we'll get an idea, we'll go and build a piece of technology, which we call a proof of concept, which is actually the stealth name for the full-blown product because it becomes the product. And we never stop those proof of concepts. We very seldom stop them. And what you're trying to do is avoid all that. So what the Mechanical Turk does is it goes, how can we use humans to simulate the end solution for the customer without doing all the work in between? So for the customer, it respects the customer. We always respect the customer. We show them a high quality value proposition. We get that in front of them. We then run around in the background with spreadsheets and call centers and emails and physically run around if we have to execute the solution. And then we give the result to the customer and then we measure what they do. There's a really good technique to short circuit the whole thing. So the example is it was March 2016, Facebook did the great disservice of launching the Facebook AI chatbot. And what happened? Everyone had to have a chatbot. That's the dumbest reason on earth to build a piece of technology because there isn't a problem there and there aren't solutions that we're solving for them. So I was working in this organization. They said, we have to have a chatbot. We have to have a chatbot. I said, no, we don't. Basically, let's figure out what the problem is. And we found a use case for this particular set of customers on a Saturday morning where a chatbot made some sense. So we did a lean canvas, we figured out everything, and they said, great, it's going to take $500,000 and 6 months to build this. If we can get it onto the roadmap, let's go, let's do this thing. And we said, just pause a second, give us 4 days to prototype it. Day one, we mocked up a fake chatbot on Facebook. Day two, we got a bunch of questions and answers together in a spreadsheet. Day three, we invited 100 VIP customers to the launch of the new product. And we got day four, we ran the experiment. Now, what's key there, we didn't go to the VIP customers. We didn't go to our worst customers. We went to our best customers. We got 100 of them. I've got this in front of them. And we launched it as, this is a real product and it's for you. You've got early access to it. Let's use it. We didn't say coming soon or would you like to use the thing or all this nonsense where we start chickening out on our experiment, which happens quite a lot. And we ran this experiment and good thing we did. 8 minutes later, we failed. We were completely wrong. We had no idea. We had the best brains in the organization working on this problem and we were wrong. So what did we do? Obviously, we didn't just stop there. On the Monday morning, we got on the phone, did some qualitative research with people, spoke to them, got the learnings in. The next week, ran another prototype and ran this 3 or 4 times until we figured out customer-led, why it failed, what they wanted, what the use case was, and then we went off and built a piece of technology. So if you pause there for a second, in 4 days and 8 minutes, we saved $500,000. So when I spoke about banking net savings, that's a real number. Because if we'd gone ahead with our guess, that 500,000 would have become 700,000. There would have been scope creep like crazy that would have come into the environment. We would have wasted 6 months of somebody's lives building this thing. And 8 minutes later, we would still have failed and have to go back to the drawing board. So a very real example of savings. And we've run Mechanical Turks in many complex environments to do this. And it works exceptionally well because you avoid all the call center integration, security integration, robust infrastructure scaling, and all the jazz that you normally have to do. So that's great. And as I start wrapping up here, why do you care? So we're already good at creating things and we're already good at building and executing in the organization. So why does this matter? Why do we need another method like prototyping? Because what you do already is you'll have some method, I'm sure, human-centered design thinking to explore and discover customer problems and explore these possible solutions. And then what you do is jump straight across to proof of concepts or MVPs and use lean and agile, all these wonderful methods to scale things out. But the missing piece is validation. So if we can get validation further up the food chain into the earlier stages of ideation, and test if someone wants it. It gives us a few benefits. First of all, we slow projects down by a week or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how fast you move. And it gives us the ability to stop them. It gives us the ability to test cheaply and quickly. It gives us the ability to learn quickly. It gives us the ability to visualize and present an offer and think what that offer would look like at the end of the food chain, right up front. And then when you're passing these validated ideas across, so out of all possible ideas, which ones could we work on? you're passing those across to an engine. And we're working with a lot of IT organizations where the problem they've got is they're getting all these unfiltered ideas that they've been told, go and build, we've got budget, go and build, we've got budget. And you're executing like crazy on all these ideas, and we're not delivering anything useful to the organization. And we end up, as I said earlier, with these unstoppable zombie projects where they're just churning on forever. And I'm sure and I don't expect you to say it on the call, but in your organization, I'm sure right now there's something in your brain that goes, this thing should never exist. We spent $1 million or 500K on it, or 100K on it. It shouldn't exist in the world. And we're maintaining it and we're funding it. We do all those wonderful things, and then we're never going to stop it. So just before we go into Q&A, what I want to leave you with is just 3 questions. Like, think about, in your organization, are you prioritizing the right ideas and features? So are you working on strategically aligned, high value prioritized ideas? Are you running experiments? We've already touched on that earlier on. So are you genuinely running experiments, or do you just think you are? And then thirdly, when you run these experiments, are you using the outcomes of those experiments in a rational way to figure out where we should be investing our time and effort and energy? So with that, thank you very much for listening to me, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Leslie. Awesome. You know, one thing that was going through my mind as you were chatting, Leslie, you know, there was a great book that came out by Douglas Hubbard, where he talked about, you know, investments. And he said, what's the most valuable data for making investment decisions? And there was 2 things that he identified as being the most important. You know, will it be used, and how quickly will it be used? And, you know, everything you're saying to us as well is helping you to get that data for that. Isn't it the most important things? Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, lovely. So please, love to, if there's any questions that people have, love to, we've got Leslie here. I'm sure people have got questions there. They're thinking, maybe the first one I would have for myself, Leslie, is what do you think, like, because we don't do this, what's the biggest thing you reckon that people need to unlearn to enable this kind of more rapid experimentation in organizations? What do you think would be the biggest thing?
They need permission. So the feedback I get from people on the ground, on the teams you work with, is afterwards is, you've given me permission to test things. You've given me a structure within which I can challenge in a positive way the organization's thinking. You're not going back and challenging your boss and saying, hey, that's a dumb idea. You're going back and saying, I've run 8 experiments and I can't give people free money to use this. Do you think we should continue? Or you're going and you say, I've got this great idea. We've run 3 experiments, and this is a valid thing. The second thing is, it's very easy to talk about failure and experimentation and innovation. Like, scan any financial statements, like innovation's mentioned 1,000 times. But if the leadership doesn't genuinely behave that way, it's like every change program, it doesn't happen. So we've got, some of the companies we're working with, the leader will stand up and he'll go, okay, we've got our failure of the year. We're just going to call Leslie up, and he's failed massively this year. Like, thank you for failing, and you saved us some money. Or, last week I was doing this thing, this pitch to somebody, the CEO would say this, and I failed. Living those values, you have to demonstrate by leadership, but more importantly, you have to have the whole system around you. You can't just have an innovation team on the side and people playing with experimentation and talking this. It's a change program. You've got to do this properly. I see there are lots of questions in the chat, I think, as well.
Do you mind if I jump in, Leslie, and ask you a question?
Course.
Is that quicker?
Yeah, go for it. That's great.
I'm just interested in, we're talking about difference between prototyping and pretotyping. So I work in a team, the UX team, they've got pretty sophisticated design, component libraries ready to go. And so theoretically, we can do quite high fidelity prototypes quite quickly. But do you think that's actually a bit of a flaw? Like, we should almost dumb it down in a sense and make the prototypes or the ideas or experiments even less sort of polished, I suppose. So at least people don't kind of get hooked up on the actual interaction. It's more just, hey, does this resonate with you? Is this something you interact with later or something like that?
So I think the best answer is, if you have the ability to run good quality experiments, this is always high quality experiments, then run them. But if the way you're running them slows you down, then remove some fidelity. So people don't need it. You don't need it at production fidelity, and you don't need all the bells and whistles checked. If you're testing a new feature, we've got clients that inject that feature into their mobile app or the mobile properties. They switch it on for 100 people and they switch it off. The failure we make is we burn all our lab rats, basically. It's a horrible way to say it, sorry. But we go, we've got 10,000 customers, we launch the feature, all of them, we measure what they do. That's one experiment. You had 1,000 experiments you could run there. And what you could do is have a little button that isn't perfect that presents the feature and measure how many people click on it. That's an experiment. That gives you data. So I would really always err on the side of how fast can you do it? What's the quickest way to do it? And if you have to dumb it down, then dumb it down. Absolutely.
Terrific. Thanks, Leslie.
Okay, sure.
Maybe just a follow on for that, Leslie. So in the example that you shared where it was for 4 days, 500K of savings, and then 8 minutes, how much did that Pretotype actually cost?
We track it too. We've got a tool that we use to manage this and underpins everything because it becomes chaotic very quickly. It probably, in terms of, if you exclude resourcing, which most companies do, it was probably about, I would guess, I'm trying to think back, maybe 8 hours of time, of people's time. It cost us, I remember, it cost us $30 for someone to make up a little logo. And we spent some time building a spreadsheet. And then the marketing team sent out an email to 100 people. So that was all that, it was a brilliant prototype. And then someone had to just sit and do the questions and answers. So it was super cheap to run the experiment.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And so my next question then is, and you also mentioned that in that experiment, you didn't have a statistically significant sample size. So if you're not getting it in that early phase, because you're just trying to test to see if it's even something you should be doing at all, do you then encourage, as part of the experimentation process later down the track, that it gets more robust as you go? Or how do you balance the theoretically great experiment versus just getting it done?
Great question. So what we're trying to do in this early stage is we're trying to go out of all possible ideas we've got say 20 or 30 prioritized ideas, test all of them as fast as we can to say which 4 or 5 we can narrow it down to. So we're trying to say, in the best case scenario, this is the test. In the best case scenario, does anybody even care? That's experiment number 1 with 100 or so people. Then we slowly escalate the complexity of those experiments and we escalate the number of customers that we're testing on. And over 4 or 6 experiments, it just seems to work out. That seems to be the number. It's like anything, you know it when you see it. It's either working or it's not working, or there's something in between that we need to tweak. At the end of it, the output of this process, we take that and we put that back into your normal business process, which does all the normal things that it does, which is going into business cases, it does the market research, it does more robust testing with proof of concepts, and that's where you'll start getting your statistical significance and all those kinds of measures coming into play.
Okay, BMK, you've got a question there that's in the chat. Would you love to ask that of Leslie?
Yeah, so thanks, Leslie. This is one of the brilliant presentation. Thank you very much for opening eyes. One of the questions is this, the chatbot example that you have used, is it kind of a prototyping that's applicable only for digital products or physical products, like which you get to customer hands, like manufacturing something and getting something out to the customer? How do you do in that scenario of prototyping?
Physical is much easier than digital in some cases, because a great example would be, and then when I'm talking about this, I was doing a talk in about 2017, 2018, and I always pronounce this wrong. So Arnott's, the biscuit brand, they launched a new set of flavors for shapes, which is an Australian institution. So what they did is they did all the normal testing, they changed the flavor, they deployed it at scale across Coles and Woolies, they launched it and it was a fiasco and they had to roll it back. And the chief marketing officer, the co-chief marketing officers of Arnott spoke at this conference. And after I spoke, they came to me and they said, you could have saved us like $5 million, because you could prototype that quite simply. You go into Woolies or Coles, you buy some shelf space, or you go to your normal shelf space, you print 20 boxes of the new flavor, you put them on the shelf and you measure if anybody takes them. You put your old product into the boxes and you count how many people go past the shelf, how many buy, you've got all these kinds of numbers. On the way out, you intercept them, you've got the data, you gift the product to them, and that's a test. It's a really simple way to do it. There's many, many ways with physical products to prototype. If you have the courage to do it and you don't over-engineer the end solution. So absolutely.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, some great comments in the chat. Just any other questions? Feel free to. Love to hear from you.
So there's a question there from Paul. I'll read it out if you'd like, Paul. Is there an overlap with Lean UX with this, Leslie?
Elaborate more on Lean UX.
Go for it. Did you want to go for it, Paul?
Yep. Yeah. So the work of Jeff Godeth, but it's around user experience, but making it more lean. So just getting that faster feedback cycle and doing UX faster than the traditional UX. So yeah, it's a companion book to Lean Startup. It's one of that series. Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you now. So I think Lean UX is probably the method of executing and optimizing the user experience. What we're talking about here is what is the shortest possible way to simulate that solution. So if you're drawing on fast ways to execute that, that's fine. That's the best answer I can give you. So it's more the mindset of how do we test this as quickly as possible, but not in a random way, in a very structured, methodical, rigorous way where we know what we're measuring, we know why we're measuring it. And then when we say run an experiment, we want the minimum quality experiment up there, but we don't want to over-engineer it. That's the best answer I can give you. Sorry. Yeah, I don't want to make stuff up.
Okay, any others, please?
I can be greedy and ask another one if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Probably just tapping into that Lean UX. I think, in some ways, often, I think you're right about the quality, because I think in Lean UX or just UX generally, it's usually pretty polished. But I do like how you differentiate, because often Lean UX is, okay, we've got a whole bunch of features. We're just going to slowly integrate the features and see which ones resonate first and maybe keep them. And it's almost like a, whack-a-mole to see which feature kind of resonates the most with customer groups. Whereas I think what or correct me if I'm wrong, is it's literally as quick and dirty to get the idea out there and just to get some level of feedback, just to move, even in a direction before you're creating any UI type stuff or any digital product, I suppose.
It's that with the caveat of the important bit is, what is the hypothesis? We work with, like most of the work we're working with our customers, and forgive me if any of them listening, but is very boring, and that's okay. It's the continuous improvement stuff. It's features for products. It's all these kinds. It's enhancements, and that's important stuff. For every single one of those, where we don't have I challenge them constantly and drive them nuts, which is, what's the data that you have to prove that the customer wants this feature? Like, do they want a social picture? Where's a simple one we tested the other day? Everyone's got social pictures. Don't care. That's other people's data. Like, do our customers want a social picture? What is our hypothesis? What percentage of them would need to want this for us to go and build it and invest in it relative to everything else in our backlog? And then once you've done that, then you do the mock-up or the put the experiment in front of them. So it's very important, because sometimes what people do is go, we're just going to blast a lot of things at and measure. What are you measuring against what? How do we know that it's worth doing?
Yep, right. Thanks.
Sure. BMK.
So how do you apply this technique to an internal products, like back office or something like that? How do you use this? Because when you have an external customer, I think one of the technique that you've used is actually, you're not telling them it's a mock or it's like a prototype. You make them believe it's real. So by the way, interact in the nice way and then give you the feedback. But how do you do this internally when you want to launch something internally that can be used by your applications team or your internal customers or staff members?
You test on them like you test on everybody else. I'll give you an example. In a large bank, we were working with them, and no one was opening the emails to read the internal comms. So the solution was Slack. So they said, we need to deploy Slack across the organization. And I said, no, we don't. Like, who's the customer? The customer's the staff member. Why aren't they reading the emails? They're probably boring, because none of us read them anyway. And Like maybe that's the problem. So should we run an experiment before we go and invest in a tool set to see what people want? Outside of their work life, everybody pulls data to themselves. They choose what they consume. At work, you get force-fed the data or the information. Of course, there's some stuff that's mandatory, but a lot of it you don't care about. So what we did is set up an experiment internally. I won't go through all the details because of time. Set up an experiment where we targeted 100 staff members. So we're testing on them. We're not telling them we're testing on them. We reformatted the way we do the communication. We made it a bit more interesting. We allowed them to opt in and opt out of various subjects, and we measured what they did. And based on that result, we ran another experiment, another one. And at the end of that, we then deployed that solution. So we didn't deploy any massive tool set, and we solved the actual problem. Now, the question obviously is, what happens if you run 3 or 4 experiments on your staff and they fail? Well, people love being part of a solution. They love innovation. They love trying new things. And at the very worst, you wasted 5 minutes of their life. Like, nobody cares about that. We get them in a room. We say, hey, thank you for contributing and saving us all this money of not deploying this thing, because we've been experimenting on you for the last sort of 3 weeks. Have some drinks or lunch or however you pacify them, and off they go. So that's how we do it. I've got a lot of other examples, but from a time point of view, you can absolutely do it internally. You just need to be brave enough to run the experiment.
Yeah, the one more question, like, is there a specific reason why you don't tell your the sample of external or internal customers that this is an experimentation? Is there a reason, psychological reason, that you don't want to tell them you're running an experimentation with this group?
Absolutely. Then you're not measuring what they really do. So if I said to you now on the call, like, what's the next thing you're going to buy on Amazon? You'll tell me one thing. What you're actually going to buy on Amazon is, I'm not sure if you drink, but if you have a glass of wine on a Saturday night and you chill and go, oh, it's an awesome idea, I love this thing, my friend told me about it, that's the next thing you're going to buy. We want to measure the thing you do. We don't want to measure the thing that you think you want to tell me to do it. There's too many variables in there if we tell you it's an experiment. If we say to you, it's coming soon, or sign up for this new feature that we're thinking of launching, or what do you think of this? People just tell you nonsense. Okay.
So the behavior changes. The behavior
absolutely
changes.
100% changes completely. In your environment, you said that you're in technology, people will say, I want a new report. You go, great. You go build a report. I'm just making this up, but we've run an experiment. We pretended that we've launched the report. We get people to subscribe to sign up to use the report. And then we hit them with a big hammer, which is, what does everybody hate? Meetings. We go, okay, there's a 2-hour training meeting next week, Wednesday, book in for the meeting. Nobody books in. We don't build a report.
Excellent. Yeah. So I think you made a point about, actually, because I'm also thinking that when you tell the people that we are going to measure their performance, and people behavior already changes. They don't behave normally. That's absolutely right. Thanks very much for that.
Okay, no problem.
It's such a good one. Yeah. Okay, we're running at near the time. We probably have 1 or 2 more last questions.
How could we contact if we want to further learn more about it, Leslie? Anything that you would like to share, your books, your talks, your email, or Twitter account or something?
I'm going to share in the meetup group, we'll share the slide deck. In the slide deck, I'm going to give you a bunch of resources. We've got a Slack community of about 680 people that talk about experimentation. It's not a salesy thing at all. It's just professionals from around the world talking about experimentation. We'll invite you to that. We've got a whole bunch of resources at exponentially.com that you can look at. And I'll point you through to some case studies. There's an online, it sounds like selling, but anyway, there's resources. There's online training you can do. We do in-person workshops and work with companies to implement this. But you'll get all the links to that. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah. No, thanks, Leslie. That's really generous. So no, well, listen, if there's we huge appreciate your time, Leslie, and it's been absolutely fantastic and hugely valuable. And I think like when we looked at those surveys at the start, and you look at companies that aren't doing this, and you think of the amount of money that's been wasted and time and energy of people. That's just it's shocking, isn't it? Really, when you think of it. Yeah,
it's wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong.
People are wasting their lives working on junk, and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
That's one question from me.
Sorry, your voice isn't great. Yeah, try again. Yeah.
We can't hear you.
Not here. You put it in the chat if you want. Okay, yeah. So no, listen, and a huge thanks to everybody, you know, for making the time, you know, and yeah, again, thanks Leslie, and he'll put that stuff in the meetup thing and give access to more. So no, just a huge thanks again, Leslie, for your time. It's been hugely valuable, and we really appreciate it, the community. So
no problem. Thank you everybody for making the time this evening. If you've got any questions, you're able to get in touch with me. Happy to help with anything, of course.
Yeah.
Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye. Have a good evening.